The boardroom fell silent as 28-year-old Sadie Miller walked to the head of the mahogany conference table. The leather portfolio in her hands contained the announcement that would change everything, not just for TechFlow Industries, but for every person who had ever been underestimated because of their age, their gender, or the circumstances of their birth. As she looked around at the faces of seasoned executives, venture capitalists, and board members, most of whom were twice her age, Sadie couldn't help but think about the phone call she'd received from her father just an hour earlier. His words still echoed in her mind. "Well, honey, congratulations on your achievement. Though I'm sure people will wonder how exactly a girl your age manages to climb the corporate ladder so fast. Must be nice having such a close relationship with the boss." Little did he know, she was about to become the boss.
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you.
3 years earlier, Sadie Miller was living in a cramped studio apartment in downtown Portland, Oregon, surviving on instant ramen and the dream that her computer science degree from Oregon State would eventually pay off. At 25, she was working the night shift at a 24-hour tech support center, fielding calls from frustrated customers whose internet had gone down or whose laptops wouldn't start. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as she sat in her cubicle, surrounded by the constant chatter of her coworkers handling similar calls. Her workstation was decorated with a small succulent plant her roommate had given her, and a post-it note that read, "This too shall pass," a reminder she desperately needed during those long, mind-numbing shifts. "Thank you for calling Tech Support Plus. This is Sadie. How can I help you today?" she'd say for the 100th time that week, forcing enthusiasm into her voice despite the exhaustion creeping in. The caller on the other end would inevitably be someone who had accidentally deleted their desktop icons or couldn't figure out why their printer wasn't working, and Sadie would patiently walk them through the solution, knowing she was capable of so much more. Her father, Robert Miller, was a mechanic who owned a small auto repair shop in Salem, about an hour south of Portland. He was a good man with calloused hands and traditional values who believed in hard work and honest living. But he also believed that some dreams were too big for some people. When Sadie had chosen computer science over the teaching degree he'd suggested, he had shaken his head and muttered something about reaching too high and setting yourself up for disappointment. "Computers are fine and all, Sadie," he'd told her over Sunday dinner at her childhood home. "But that's a man's world. Those big tech companies, they're not looking for girls from Salem, Oregon. They want the Harvard boys, the MIT graduates. You're smart, don't get me wrong, but maybe you should consider something more realistic." Her mother, Linda, would usually change the subject whenever these conversations started, serving another helping of pot roast or asking about Sadie's coworker drama. Linda worked as a secretary at the local elementary school and had always encouraged Sadie's ambitions, but she also understood her husband's concerns about their daughter's lofty dreams. Sadie's younger brother, Marcus, was 23 and had followed their father into automotive work. He was naturally gifted with engines and had never questioned the path laid out for him. At family gatherings, Robert would beam with pride when talking about Marcus's latest automotive achievement, while Sadie's tech support job was mentioned briefly, almost apologetically, as if it were a phase she hadn't yet grown out of. The studio apartment Sadie called home was in a converted warehouse building that housed mostly other young professionals trying to make it in Portland. Her neighbors included a barista who was also a part-time musician, a graphic designer who delivered food on weekends, and a recent college graduate who sold vintage clothing online. They were all hustling, all grinding, all believing that their current circumstances were temporary stepping stones to something better. Sadie's daily routine was as predictable as it was exhausting. She'd wake up at 3 p.m., shower in the tiny bathroom she shared with cockroaches that seemed immune to every spray she'd tried, then grab a quick meal before heading to work. Her commute involved 2 bus transfers and usually included at least one delayed connection that made her sprint the last 3 blocks to avoid being late. The tech support center was located in a generic office building that looked like every other generic office building in the area. The company, Tech Support Plus, provided customer service for various smaller tech companies that couldn't afford their own full-time support teams. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid the bills and gave Sadie valuable experience troubleshooting real-world tech problems. Her supervisor, Janet Rodriguez, was a no-nonsense woman in her 40s who had worked her way up from the same position Sadie now held. Janet saw potential in Sadie that others missed. She noticed how Sadie could solve complex problems faster than most of her colleagues, how customers specifically requested to speak with her again when they had follow-up issues, and how she would often stay late to help train new employees without being asked. "You're wasting your talent here, Miller," Janet would tell her during their brief breaks. "I've been doing this for 15 years, and I can count on one hand the number of people I've met who have your natural ability to understand both the technical side and the human side of these problems. You should be building systems, not just fixing them." But building systems required opportunities that seemed impossibly far away from Sadie's current reality. The big tech companies Janet mentioned might as well have been on another planet. She had applied to dozens of positions at established companies, only to receive form rejection letters or complete silence in response. Her resume, while solid, didn't have the prestigious internships or connections that seemed to matter so much in the industry. During her off hours, Sadie spent most of her time in the office's common area, which had decent Wi-Fi and more space than her cramped studio. She'd work on personal coding projects, teaching herself new programming languages and frameworks through online tutorials and documentation. Her laptop, a refurbished machine she had bought with her first paycheck, was her gateway to a world of possibilities that felt simultaneously within reach and completely unattainable.
The other residents of her building had grown accustomed to finding Sadie curled up on the worn leather couch in the common room, surrounded by empty coffee cups and handwritten notes covered in code snippets and system diagrams. She was working on a project she called Flow State, a productivity application that would help remote teams collaborate more efficiently. It was ambitious, probably too ambitious for a solo developer working in her spare time, but it gave her something to focus on beyond the endless cycle of password resets and printer troubleshooting. Her social life was limited, but meaningful. She had a small group of friends from college who were scattered across the Pacific Northwest pursuing their own versions of the American dream. They'd meet up occasionally for happy hour or weekend hikes in the Columbia River Gorge, sharing war stories from their respective industries and offering mutual support during the inevitable moments of doubt. Sarah Chen, her closest friend from college, was working as a software developer at a mid-sized company in Seattle and served as Sadie's main source of industry insight. During their monthly phone calls, Sarah would share stories about her work environment, the projects she was involved in, and the career growth opportunities that seemed so much more abundant in Seattle's thriving tech scene. "You need to get out of that support center," Sarah would tell her. "I know it's scary to make a jump, but you're never going to reach your potential if you don't take some risks. The worst thing that can happen is you fail and have to find another support job, which is exactly where you are now anyway." But risk-taking required a safety net that Sadie didn't have. Her paycheck covered her basic expenses with very little left over for savings. Moving to a city like Seattle or San Francisco would require money she didn't have and connections she hadn't made. So she stayed in Portland, grinding through her night shifts and working on Flow State whenever she could find the energy. The turning point came on a particularly difficult Thursday night in November. Sadie had been dealing with an especially challenging technical issue for one of Tech Support Plus's clients, a mid-sized logistics company called TechFlow Industries that was experiencing system crashes that their internal IT team couldn't resolve. The problem had been escalated through 3 different support levels before landing on Sadie's desk. Most of her colleagues would have followed the standard troubleshooting script and eventually escalated the issue to a specialist, but Sadie was intrigued by the complexity of the problem. She spent her entire shift digging into the system logs, analyzing error patterns, and developing a theory about what might be causing the crashes. By morning, she had not only identified the root cause, a conflict between 2 recently updated software modules, but had also written a detailed report explaining the issue and proposing a long-term solution that would prevent similar problems in the future. Janet was impressed, but what happened next changed everything. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The email arrived at 6:47 a.m. on Friday morning, just as Sadie was finally settling into bed after her grueling Thursday night shift. Her phone buzzed with a notification that would have normally been ignored until she woke up that afternoon. But something about the sender's name made her pause. David Chen, CTO, TechFlow Industries. TechFlow Industries, the same company whose system she had spent all night debugging. Sadie rubbed her tired eyes and opened the message. What she read made her sit up straight in her cramped studio apartment, suddenly wide awake despite having worked for 12 straight hours. Ms. Miller, I received your technical analysis report through our support ticket system. In 15 years of working in technology, I have rarely encountered such thorough problem-solving combined with innovative forward-thinking solutions. Your identification of the module conflict issue and your proposed architecture improvements demonstrate a level of understanding that frankly surprised me, given that this came through a basic support channel. I would like to discuss a potential opportunity with you. Would you be available for a phone conversation today at 2 p.m. Pacific? David Chen. Sadie stared at the screen, reading the message 3 times to make sure she wasn't hallucinating from exhaustion. David Chen was the Chief Technology Officer of TechFlow Industries, a company she had researched extensively after receiving their support ticket. TechFlow was a logistics technology firm based in downtown Portland that had been growing rapidly over the past 5 years, developing software solutions for supply chain management and warehouse automation. She quickly looked up David Chen's LinkedIn profile and discovered he was a 34-year-old MIT graduate who had previously worked at Amazon and Google before joining TechFlow 2 years earlier. His profile showed he was responsible for leading a team of over 40 engineers and overseeing the company's entire technical infrastructure. And he wanted to talk to her, to Sadie Miller, night shift tech support operator from Salem, Oregon. The irony wasn't lost on her that Sarah Chen, her college friend who had been encouraging her to take risks, shared the same last name as this CTO. She immediately called Sarah, despite knowing her friend would still be sleeping in Seattle. "This better be life or death important, Sadie," Sarah mumbled into the phone. "I didn't get to bed until 2 a.m. "Sarah, I think I might have just gotten the break we've been talking about. The CTO of TechFlow Industries wants to have a phone conversation with me this afternoon." Sarah was suddenly very awake. "Wait, what? How did that happen? And did you say TechFlow? That's the company my cousin works for in their marketing department. They're supposed to be one of the hottest startups in Portland right now." Sadie explained the entire situation, the complex technical issue, her detailed analysis, and David Chen's unexpected email. Sarah listened intently, occasionally interrupting with questions about the technical details and TechFlow's business model. "Sadie, this is huge," Sarah said when the story was complete. "You realize that CTOs don't personally reach out to support staff unless they're seriously impressed, right? This isn't just a courtesy call. He's probably looking at you for a position." The possibility hadn't fully occurred to Sadie until Sarah said it out loud. She had been so focused on the validation of having her technical work recognized that she hadn't considered what David Chen's actual intentions might be. After hanging up with Sarah, Sadie spent the next few hours researching everything she could find about TechFlow Industries. The company had been founded 6 years earlier by 2 former logistics executives, Jennifer Walsh and Michael Torres, who had identified inefficiencies in traditional supply chain management systems. They had started with a small team of 5 people working out of a shared office space in Southeast Portland. TechFlow's big breakthrough had come 3 years earlier when they developed a machine learning algorithm that could predict inventory needs with unprecedented accuracy. This technology had attracted major clients including Nike, Adidas, and several large grocery chains. The company had raised $50 million in Series B funding 18 months ago and was reportedly preparing for their Series C round. What impressed Sadie most was TechFlow's company culture, which emphasized innovation, continuous learning, and promoting from within. Their website featured profiles of employees who had started in entry-level positions and worked their way up to leadership roles.
Jennifer Walsh herself had started as a warehouse coordinator before earning her MBA and co-founding the company. At exactly 2 p.m., Sadie's phone rang. She had been pacing around her studio apartment for the previous 30 minutes, rehearsing potential conversation topics and trying to calm her nerves. "Hello, this is Sadie Miller," she answered, attempting to sound professional and confident. "Sadie, this is David Chen from TechFlow. Thank you for making time to speak with me today. I hope I didn't catch you at a bad time." "Not at all, Mr. Chen. Thank you for reaching out. I have to admit, receiving your email was quite a surprise." "Please, call me David, and I imagine it was surprising. Let me get straight to the point. Your analysis of our system issue was exceptional. Not only did you correctly identify the root cause, but your proposed solutions demonstrate a deep understanding of scalable architecture principles that most senior developers struggle with."
David went on to explain that TechFlow was experiencing rapid growth and needed to expand their engineering team. They were particularly interested in finding developers who could think systematically about complex problems and communicate technical concepts clearly to non-technical stakeholders. "I've reviewed your background, Sadie, and while your formal experience is in technical support, your problem-solving approach suggests you have the potential to excel in a development role. We have an opening for a junior software engineer position that I think might interest you." Sadie felt her heart racing. This was the opportunity she had been dreaming about for years, but it was happening so suddenly that she almost couldn't process it. "I'm definitely interested, David. Can you tell me more about what the role would involve?" "You'd be working on our core logistics platform, collaborating with our senior engineers to implement new features and optimize existing systems. The position would involve both front-end and back-end development, with opportunities to work on machine learning integration as you develop your skills. We believe in promoting based on merit and results, so there would be significant growth potential for the right person." They talked for another 20 minutes about the technical aspects of the role, TechFlow's development processes, and the company's plans for expansion. David explained that they used modern development frameworks and cloud infrastructure, which aligned perfectly with the technology Sadie had been teaching herself through online tutorials. "I'd like to invite you to come in for an interview next Wednesday," David said as the conversation began to wind down. "You'd meet with me, our lead engineer, Amanda Foster, and our founders, Jennifer and Michael. Does that work with your schedule?" Sadie quickly calculated in her head. Wednesday was normally one of her days off from the tech support center, so she wouldn't need to request time off or explain her absence to Janet. "Yes, that works perfectly. Wednesday would be great." "Excellent. I'll have my assistant send you the details. One more thing, Sadie. I want you to know that we're serious about this opportunity. Based on what I've seen of your work, I believe you have the potential to make significant contributions to our team. I hope you'll consider joining us." After ending the call, Sadie sat in stunned silence for several minutes. In the span of one phone conversation, her entire career trajectory had potentially changed. The junior software engineer position at TechFlow would not only represent a massive step up from tech support, but it would also place her in an environment where she could learn from experienced developers and work on cutting-edge technology. But as the initial excitement began to settle, doubt crept in. What if she wasn't actually qualified for the role? What if David Chen had overestimated her abilities based on one technical report? What if she interviewed poorly and embarrassed herself in front of TechFlow's leadership team? She called her parents that evening to share the news, though she was careful not to get their hopes up too high. "That's wonderful, honey. I'm so proud of you for impressing such important people with your work." Her father, Robert, was characteristically cautious. "Well, that's nice that they want to talk to you, but don't get your hopes up too high. These tech companies, they probably interview dozens of people for every position. And you said this David fellow went to MIT? He's probably used to working with people who went to fancy schools." "Dad, he specifically sought me out based on my work. This isn't just a courtesy interview." "I'm just saying, keep your expectations realistic. You've got a good job now that pays the bills. Sometimes it's better to be satisfied with what you have than to chase after something that might not work out." After hanging up, Sadie realized that her father's skepticism, while well-intentioned, only strengthened her resolve. She had spent too many years accepting limitations that others placed on her capabilities. This opportunity represented a chance to prove, to herself and to everyone else, that she belonged in the world of innovative technology companies. The next few days passed in a blur of preparation. Sadie studied TechFlow's technology stack, reviewed common interview questions for software engineering positions, and worked in a portfolio of personal projects to demonstrate her coding abilities. She even bought her first professional outfit, a navy blue blazer and matching pants from a discount retailer, using money she had been saving for emergencies. On Tuesday night, the evening before her interview, Sadie stood in front of the mirror in her tiny studio apartment, practicing her responses to potential interview questions. She thought about all the nights she had spent in that fluorescent lit tech support center, all the times she had wondered if she would ever get a chance to prove what she was capable of. Tomorrow would determine whether this was the beginning of a new chapter in her life or just another disappointment to add to the collection.
Wednesday morning arrived with the kind of Portland drizzle that seemed to seep into everything: Sadie's jacket, her confidence, and her carefully straightened hair. As she stood outside TechFlow Industries' sleek glass building in the Pearl District, watching employees in expensive coats hurry through the revolving doors, every insecurity she had ever felt about her background came flooding back. The building itself was intimidating. 15 stories of modern architecture with floor-to-ceiling windows and a lobby that looked more like a high-end hotel than an office space. Through the glass, she could see people her age walking around in designer jeans and expensive sneakers, carrying laptops that probably cost more than her monthly rent. She checked her reflection in her phone screen one more time. The navy blazer she had bought looked cheap under the harsh morning light, and she suddenly realized that everyone else seemed to understand some unwritten dress code that she had missed entirely. Her carefully planned professional outfit felt like a costume that didn't quite fit. "You can do this," she whispered to herself, clutching the portfolio containing printed copies of her code samples and the technical report that had started this whole opportunity. "You earned this interview." But as she approached the reception desk, her internal voice began cataloging all the reasons why this was a mistake. The receptionist, a polished woman about Sadie's age with perfectly applied makeup and what appeared to be a designer blouse, smiled warmly and directed her to the 11th floor. The elevator ride felt eternal. Sadie found herself surrounded by TechFlow employees discussing projects with casual references to technologies and methodologies that she recognized from online tutorials but had never used in a professional setting. Their conversation was peppered with acronyms and industry jargon that made her realize how much she still had to learn. "The API integration with the ML pipeline is causing some latency issues. I think we need to refactor the microservices architecture before the Q1 deployment." Sadie understood the individual words, but the casual way they discussed such complex topics made her feel like an imposter who had somehow convinced people she belonged in their world. What if David Chen asked her about microservices architecture? What if she revealed during the interview that her experience was limited to fixing password resets and printer connection issues? The 11th floor was an open workspace with exposed brick walls, industrial lighting, and standing desks scattered throughout. Employees worked on multiple monitors while sipping coffee from branded mugs, and the energy was unlike anything Sadie had experienced in her fluorescent-lit cubicle at Tech Support Plus. David Chen appeared exactly on time, extending his hand with a warm smile. He was younger than she had expected and dressed more casually: jeans, a button-down shirt, and sneakers that probably cost more than Sadie's monthly grocery budget. "Sadie, great to meet you in person. I hope you didn't have any trouble finding us." "Not at all. Thank you again for this opportunity, David." "My pleasure. Let's start with a quick tour and then we'll sit down with the team." As David led her through the office, pointing out different departments and explaining TechFlow's workflow, Sadie felt increasingly out of place. The developers they passed were working on multiple screens displaying complex code, data visualizations, and system monitoring tools that looked like something from a science fiction movie. In the break room, which featured an espresso machine that probably cost more than Sadie's laptop, David introduced her to several employees. Each one seemed genuinely friendly, but their casual mentions of previous work at Google, Facebook, or various well-funded startups only reinforced how different her background was.
This is Marcus Thompson, one of our senior front-end developers, David said, introducing a guy about Sadie's age with thick-rimmed glasses and a Stanford computer science hoodie. Marcus joined us after 3 years at Airbnb. Nice to meet you, Sadie. What's your background? David mentioned you're coming from a support role, which is actually pretty cool. We don't get many candidates who have real experience dealing with end-user problems. Before Sadie could respond, David was already moving toward the conference room where her formal interview would take place. But Marcus's comment stuck with her. Was her support background something to be ashamed of, or could it actually be valuable? The conference room had a wall of windows overlooking the Willamette River, and sitting around the polished wooden table were 3 people who would determine whether her life was about to change dramatically. Jennifer Walsh, TechFlow's co-founder and CEO, was a woman in her early 40s with silver-streaked hair and an intensity that was immediately apparent. She wore a simple black sweater and jeans, but carried herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to making million-dollar decisions. Michael Torres, the other co-founder and COO, appeared to be in his late 30s with a friendly demeanor that immediately put Sadie more at ease. He was taking notes in a leather-bound notebook and looked up with an encouraging smile as she entered. Amanda Foster, the lead engineer David had mentioned, was perhaps the most intimidating of the group. She appeared to be in her early 30s, with short-cropped hair and sharp eyes that seemed to be evaluating Sadie's every move. Her laptop was open to what looked like complex system diagrams, and she had the air of someone who had built things that thousands of people used. "Sadie, please have a seat," Jennifer said, gesturing to the chair across from them. "We're excited to learn more about you and discuss how we might fit into our team." The first part of the interview went reasonably well. Jennifer asked about her educational background and her experience at Tech Support Plus. Sadie found herself relaxing slightly as she talked about the problem-solving aspects of her current role and her passion for understanding how complex systems work.
But then Amanda Foster opened her laptop and turned it towards Sadie. "I'd like to walk through some of your technical thinking," Amanda said. "Can you explain how you would approach designing a system that needs to handle real-time inventory updates for multiple warehouses across different time zones?" Sadie's heart began racing. This was exactly the kind of question she had worried about, something that required not just theoretical knowledge, but practical experience with distributed systems and real-time processing. "Well," she began, buying time while her mind raced through everything she had learned from online courses and documentation. "I would start by considering the data consistency requirements and whether we need immediate consistency or if eventual consistency would be acceptable." As she talked through her approach, she could see Amanda taking notes, but her expression remained neutral. Michael Torres nodded encouragingly at several points, but Jennifer Walsh's poker face gave away nothing about how she was performing. The technical questions continued for another 20 minutes, covering topics ranging from database design to API architecture to scalability considerations. Some questions Sadie handled confidently, drawing on her self-taught knowledge and her experience troubleshooting real-world systems. Others revealed the gaps in her experience, moments where she had to admit she had theoretical knowledge but no practical experience with certain technologies. "That's honest," Michael said after Sadie acknowledged that she had never worked with Kubernetes, but was eager to learn. "We appreciate candidates who are upfront about what they don't know." But Sadie could feel the weight of each admission of inexperience. How many gaps were too many? How much of her knowledge needed to be practical versus theoretical? The most challenging moment came when Jennifer asked about her long-term career goals. "Where do you see yourself in 5 years, Sadie?" It was a standard interview question, but Sadie suddenly realized she had never articulated her ambitions out loud to people who actually had the power to make them reality. Her dreams had always seemed so far-fetched that she had barely allowed herself to voice them, even to Sarah or her parents. "I want to build systems that solve real problems for real people," she said, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. "I've spent 3 years helping people when their technology fails them, and I've seen how much impact well-designed systems can have on someone's day or even their livelihood. I want to be part of creating technology that makes people's lives better, not just more complicated." She paused, realizing she hadn't directly answered the question about where she saw herself in 5 years.
As for the specific role or title, I'm honestly more interested in the impact I can have and the problems I can help solve. I know I have a lot to learn, but I'm willing to work harder than anyone else to get there. Jennifer made a note in her notebook, but her expression remained unreadable. After the formal interview concluded, David walked Sadie back to the elevator, making small talk about her impressions of the office and the team. But she could tell he was being polite rather than enthusiastic, and his earlier warmth seemed to have cooled slightly. We'll be making our decision within the next few days. We have a couple more candidates to interview, but we'll be in touch either way. The elevator ride down felt different from the ride out. Instead of nervous anticipation, Sadie felt the crushing weight of disappointment settling in her chest. She had prepared for this interview for days, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she had revealed herself to be exactly what she feared, someone who didn't really belong in their world. Walking back through the Pearl District, past the expensive restaurants and boutique shops that TechFlow employees probably frequented, Sadie replayed every moment of the interview in her head. Each technical question she had struggled with felt magnified. Each admission of inexperience felt more damning. Her phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. How did it go? Sadie stared at the message for several minutes before responding. Hard to tell. I think I may have been out of my league. The response came back immediately. Don't you dare sell yourself short. You earned that interview with your work, not your resume. But as Sadie waited for the bus back to her studio apartment, surrounded by the reality of her current life, she couldn't help but wonder if her father had been right all along. Maybe some dreams were too big for some people. Maybe reaching too high really does just set you up for disappointment. The bus ride home was filled with commuters heading to jobs that suddenly seemed more realistic than the world she had just glimpsed at TechFlow. As Portland's skyline disappeared behind her, so did the brief fantasy that she might actually belong among those confident professionals with their expensive laptops and casual references to industry-changing projects. By the time she reached her neighborhood, Sadie had almost convinced herself that going back to her night shift at Tech Support Plus might not be such a bad thing after all. Friday afternoon brought an email that Sadie had been dreading to receive. She was in the middle of her shift at Tech Support Plus, mechanically walking an elderly customer through updating their browser settings, when her phone lit up with a notification from David Chen. Sadie, thank you for taking the time to interview with us on Wednesday. After careful consideration and discussion with our team, we've decided to move forward with another candidate whose experience more closely aligns with our immediate needs. However, I want you to know that we were genuinely impressed with your problem-solving abilities and your passion for technology. I encourage you to continue developing your skills, and I hope our paths cross again in the future. Best regards, David. The words blurred together as Sadie read them, twice, then a third time. She had prepared herself for this possibility, but the reality of rejection still hit like a physical blow. The customer on the other end of her headset was asking if she was still there, but for a moment, Sadie couldn't find her voice. Yes, I'm here, she managed. Let me walk you through those next steps. The rest of her shift passed in a haze. Every password reset and connectivity issue felt more meaningless than before, now that she had glimpsed what her career could have been. Her coworkers chatted about weekend plans and office gossip, but Sadie felt disconnected from their world in a way she never had before. Janet Rodriguez noticed her distraction during their brief overlap at shift change. You seem off today, Miller. Everything okay? Sadie hesitated, then decided there was no point in hiding what had happened. I interviewed for a software engineering position earlier this week. Didn't get it. Janet's eyebrows rose. You interviewed somewhere else? Good for you. What company? TechFlow Industries. It was a long shot anyway. TechFlow? Janet whistled low. That's not a long shot. That's shooting for the moon. Those guys are major league. What made you think you were ready for something like that? The question stung more than Janet probably intended. It echoed the doubts that had been plaguing Sadie since Wednesday, the same skepticism her father had expressed, the same voice in her head that whispered she wasn't good enough. Maybe I wasn't ready, Sadie said, quietly. Janet studied her for a moment, then pulled a chair next to Sadie's workstation. Listen,
I've been in this industry long enough to know that not ready is usually code for something else. What really happened in that interview? Sadie found herself recounting the entire experience. The intimidating office, the technical questions, and the feeling of being surrounded by people who seemed to belong in ways she never could. Janet listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding or making small sounds of understanding. So let me get this straight. They called you for an interview based on work you did here. They were impressed enough to bring you in and spend significant time with their senior leadership. You held your own in technical discussions with their lead engineer. And you think you failed because you didn't know everything about technologies you've never had a chance to work with professionally? Put that way, Sadie's self-criticism seemed less rational. But they rejected me, she pointed out. Of course they did. You know why? Because they're looking for someone who can hit the ground running on day one. They've got deadlines and investors breathing down their necks. That doesn't mean you're not capable. It means their timeline doesn't match your learning curve. Janet leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. You want to know what I think? I think you got a taste of what's possible, and now you're scared. It's easier to believe you're not good enough than to do the work required to get there. The words hit harder than the rejection email had. Sadie wanted to argue, to defend herself, but something about Janet's direct assessment rang true in a way that made her uncomfortable. What are you suggesting I do? I'm suggesting you stop feeling sorry for yourself and start acting like someone who deserves to be in that room. You've got skills, Miller. I've seen them. But skills aren't enough if you don't have the confidence to use them. Over the weekend, Sadie found herself replaying both the interview and her conversation with Janet. She walked through Forest Park, one of her favorite places to think, trying to sort through the conflicting emotions and voices in her head. Her phone rang as she was sitting on a fallen log overlooking the city. Sarah's name appeared on the screen. I've been thinking about your interview all week. Have you heard anything? They went with someone else. Damn, I'm sorry, Sadie. But you know what? Getting that interview in the first place proves you're on the right track. Most people never even get in the door at companies like TechFlow. That's what my supervisor said, too. Smart woman. So what's your next move? Sadie hadn't really considered that there would be a next move. The rejection had felt so final, so definitive. But Sarah's question made her realize that she was treating the setback as an ending rather than information.
I honestly don't know. Part of me thinks maybe I should just accept that this is where I belong. Bullshit, Sarah said with characteristic bluntness. The Sadie I know doesn't give up after one rejection. Remember when you couldn't get the sorting algorithm to work in data structures class? You spent 3 days in the computer lab until you figured it out. Sadie did remember. She also remembered the satisfaction of finally seeing her code execute correctly, the feeling of having conquered something that had seemed impossible just days before. This is different, Sarah. This is my career, my future. The stakes are higher. Exactly, which is why giving up isn't an option. After ending the call, Sadie sat in the quiet forest for another hour, watching the late afternoon light filter through the trees. She thought about the moment during her TechFlow interview when she had talked about wanting to build systems that solve real problems for real people. Even as she had spoken those words, she had felt their truth resonating in her chest. That passion hadn't disappeared just because one company had said no. By Sunday evening, Sadie had made a decision that surprised even her. Instead of wallowing in rejection, she was going to use it as fuel. If TechFlow thought she needed more experience with professional-level technologies, she would get that experience. If her knowledge gaps had cost her this opportunity, she would fill those gaps. She opened her laptop and began researching bootcamp programs, online courses, and open-source projects she could contribute to. But more importantly, she started thinking strategically about how to position herself for the next opportunity. Her Flow State project, which had been gathering digital dust for months, suddenly seemed the perfect vehicle for demonstrating her growth. She could rebuild it using the technologies and architectural patterns that had come up in her TechFlow interview. She could document her learning process, create a portfolio that told the story of her development as an engineer. On Monday morning, Sadie did something she had never done before. She requested a meeting with Janet to discuss adjusting her schedule at Tech Support Plus. "I want to drop down to part-time. I need more time to develop my skills and work on projects that will prepare me for the next opportunity." Janet smiled. "Now that sounds like someone who's ready to fight for what she wants. What's your plan?" Sadie outlined her strategy: 20 hours a week at Tech Support Plus to cover her basic expenses, the remaining time dedicated to intensive skill development and project work. She would rebuild FlowState as a showcase application, contribute to open-source projects to gain experience with collaborative development, and complete advanced online courses in the technologies she had struggled with during her interview. "It's going to be tight financially," Sadie admitted. "I'll probably have to move to an even smaller place, maybe get a roommate. But I can't keep waiting for permission to become the developer I want to be." Janet nodded approvingly. "You know what the difference is between you today and you last Friday? Last Friday, you were hoping someone would give you a chance. Today, you're planning to create your own chances." That evening, Sadie called her parents to explain her decision. As expected, her father was concerned about the financial risk. "You've got a steady job now, honey. Why would you cut your hours when you could be saving money instead?" "Because steady isn't enough anymore, Dad. I want to build something meaningful with my career, not just collect paychecks." "But what if this plan doesn't work out? What if you spend months working on these projects and still don't get hired anywhere?" It was a fair question, one that Sadie had asked herself repeatedly over the weekend, but she had also realized something important during her time in Forest Park. "Then at least I'll know I tried everything I could. The alternative is spending the rest of my life wondering what might have happened if I had been brave enough to bet on myself." Her mother's voice came through the speaker. "I think you're being very courageous, Sadie. It takes strength to keep going after disappointment." "Thanks, Mom. That means a lot." After hanging up, Sadie sat at her small kitchen table and opened her laptop. The FlowState codebase looked primitive compared to what she had seen at TechFlow, but it was hers. It was proof that she could build things from nothing, that she could turn ideas into working software. She opened a new document and began writing what she called her commitment contract, a detailed plan for the next 6 months that included specific learning goals, project milestones, and application deadlines. At the top of the document, she wrote, "I commit to becoming the developer I know I can be, regardless of how many people tell me I can't." As she typed out her goals and deadlines, Sadie felt something she hadn't experienced since receiving David Chen's rejection email: excitement about the future. The TechFlow interview had been a setback, but it had also been education. She now knew exactly what she needed to learn and exactly what she was working toward. The rejection had forced her to confront an uncomfortable truth. She had been waiting for external validation instead of creating her own opportunities. But that was changing, starting now. For the first time since Wednesday, Sadie allowed herself to imagine walking into another company's office 6 months from now, not as someone hoping to convince them she belonged, but as someone who knew she did.
3 weeks into her new schedule, Sadie discovered that ambition and reality rarely aligned as neatly as she had hoped. Her studio apartment, which had always felt cramped, now resembled a war zone of learning materials, empty coffee cups, and crumpled papers covered in system diagrams that made sense at 2 a.m., but looked like hieroglyphics in daylight. She had moved to a smaller, cheaper apartment in southeast Portland, a converted garage behind a house owned by an elderly woman named Mrs. Chen, who spoke limited English but had been charmed by Sadie's politeness and prompt payment of first month's rent. The space was barely large enough for a bed, desk, and mini refrigerator, but it cut her housing costs by 40%, freeing up money she desperately needed for online courses and certification programs. The transition to part-time at Tech Support Plus had been more jarring than expected. Working only 20 hours a week meant her paychecks had shrunk to barely cover essentials, forcing her to adopt a diet that consisted primarily of rice,
beans and whatever vegetables were marked down at the grocery store. She had canceled her Netflix subscription, switched to a cheaper phone plan, and walked everywhere she could to save on bus fare. But the real challenge wasn't financial. It was psychological. After years of having her days structured by work schedules and external obligations, the freedom to direct her own learning felt overwhelming. Some mornings she would wake up energized and ready to tackle complex programming challenges. Other days, the weight of everything she didn't know felt paralyzing. Her first major victory came during week 4 when she successfully deployed a modernized version of FlowState to AWS using Docker containers and a PostgreSQL database. The application was still basic, a task management system with real-time collaboration features, but it represented a massive leap forward from her original static prototype. She celebrated by calling Sarah, who was working late at her Seattle office. "I just deployed my first application to the cloud," Sadie announced, unable to keep the pride out of her voice. "That's huge! How does it feel to see your code running on real infrastructure?" "Terrifying and amazing at the same time. I keep checking the server logs, expecting everything to break, but it's actually working." You know what this means, right? You're not just someone who can fix other people's problems anymore. You're someone who can build solutions. The distinction felt significant. For the first time, Sadie began to think of herself as a developer rather than someone aspiring to become one. But success was followed quickly by a humbling reminder of how much she still had to learn. Her attempt to implement user authentication resulted in a security vulnerability so glaring that the programming forum where she posted her code for review responded with a mixture of helpful advice and gentle horror at her approach. "Never, ever store passwords in plain text," wrote a developer named Alex Code Seattle. "Even for a demo project, this is a habits issue. You're training yourself to do the wrong thing." The criticism stung, but it was also educational. Sadie spent the next 3 days learning about password hashing, encryption, and security best practices. What had seemed like a minor feature addition, allowing users to create accounts, opened up an entire world of considerations she had never encountered. Each small victory revealed new gaps in her knowledge. Implementing real-time notifications led to discovering WebSocket technology and event-driven architecture. Adding a mobile responsive interface meant learning modern CSS frameworks and responsive design principles. Every solution she implemented raised new questions about scalability, performance, and maintainability. The learning curve was steep enough to make her dizzy, but Sadie found herself energized by the challenge in ways her tech support job had never provided. Each late night spent debugging code or working through online tutorials felt like an investment in her future rather than just another task to complete. Her biggest breakthrough came during week 8, when she discovered an open-source project called LogisticsFlow, a warehouse management system that needed volunteer developers to help with bug fixes and feature development. The project was managed by a small team of developers scattered across different companies, collaborating in their spare time to build tools for small businesses that couldn't afford enterprise software. Sadie's first contribution was modest, fixing a bug in the inventory reporting module that was causing date calculations to display incorrectly. But the process of submitting her fix through GitHub, having it reviewed by experienced developers, and seeing it merged into the main codebase gave her a rush unlike anything she had experienced in her professional life. The project's lead maintainer, a senior developer at Microsoft, Kevin Wu, left a comment on her pull request. "Clean fix, good documentation. Thanks for the contribution at Sadie Miller Dev. Would you be interested in tackling a larger feature request?" Sadie stared at the comment for several minutes before responding. Kevin Wu was asking her to take on a significant piece of development work. The feature request involved building an API endpoint that would allow external applications to query inventory data in real time. "I'd love to work on that," she replied. "This would be my first time building an API from scratch, but I'm eager to learn." "Perfect! Everyone starts somewhere. I'll assign it to you and provide some guidance to get you started."
Working on the LogisticsFlow API became Sadie's obsession.
She spent every free moment researching REST API design principles, studying the existing code base to understand the project's architecture, and building test implementations to validate her approach. The technical challenges were significant, but the social aspects of collaborative development proved equally complex. Code reviews from other contributors sometimes included feedback that felt harsh, even when it was objectively helpful. Learning to separate criticism of her code from criticism of her abilities required developing a thicker skin than she had needed in her previous work. "Your error handling is inconsistent," wrote one reviewer on her initial API implementation. "Some functions return null on failure, others throw exceptions. Pick a pattern and stick with it throughout the module." A month earlier, feedback like that might have discouraged Sadie from continuing, but now she recognized it as valuable input from someone with more experience, even if the delivery was blunt. She revised her implementation, standardizing the error handling approach and adding comprehensive documentation for each endpoint. The second review was more positive, with only minor suggestions for improvement. "Much better. This is production-ready code," Kevin Wu commented on her final submission. "You've made significant progress since your first contribution." The API feature was merged into LogisticsFlow version 2.1, and Sadie's name appeared in the release notes as a contributor. Seeing her work become part of a software package that would be downloaded and used by real businesses felt surreal. But the victory was short-lived. During week 12 of her intensive learning schedule, Sadie received an email that made her question whether her unconventional path was actually leading anywhere. The message was from a recruiter at a Portland-based startup called DataSync Solutions, reaching out about a junior developer position. The company had seen her GitHub contributions to LogisticsFlow and was interested in discussing opportunities. Sadie's initial excitement faded as she researched DataSync Solutions. The company was in the early stages of development with only 8 employees and funding that seemed uncertain. The salary range they mentioned was barely above what she had been making at Tech Support Plus, and the job description included responsibilities that seemed to overlap significantly with technical support work. It wasn't the kind of opportunity she had been hoping for, but it was an opportunity nonetheless. Should she pursue it or hold out for something closer to her vision of the ideal position? The decision was complicated by her dwindling savings account. 3 months of reduced income had eliminated her financial cushion, and she was now living paycheck to paycheck. Her landlady, Mrs. Chen, had been understanding when Sadie's rent was a few days late the previous month, but she couldn't count on that flexibility indefinitely. During a video call with Sarah, Sadie laid out her dilemma. "It's not the role I want, but it would be experience working as a professional developer. Maybe I should take it and continue learning on the side." "Or maybe you should trust the process," Sarah replied. "You've made incredible progress in just 3 months. Your GitHub profile looks like it belongs to someone with years of experience. Don't sell yourself short just because you're scared about money." Easy for you to say. You have a steady income and a savings account. You're right, that was insensitive, but I still think you're underestimating your progress. Have you considered reaching out to TechFlow again? You're not the same candidate you were 3 months ago. The suggestion seemed audacious. David Chen had been polite but clear in his rejection. Wouldn't contacting him again seem desperate or pushy? But as Sadie looked around her tiny apartment surrounded by evidence of everything she had learned and built over the past 3 months, she realized Sarah might be right. She wasn't the same person who had nervously entered TechFlow's offices in November. She had code in production, contributions to open source projects, and experience collaborating with developers around the world. Maybe it was time to find out if anyone else had noticed her transformation.
The email from Kevin Wu arrived on a Tuesday morning in February, and its subject line immediately made Sadie's stomach drop. Urgent, security issue with API implementation. She opened the message with trembling fingers, already dreading what she would find. "Sadie, we've discovered a critical security vulnerability in the API endpoint you developed for LogisticsFlow. A security researcher found that the authentication system can be bypassed using SQL injection attacks, potentially exposing sensitive inventory data for all users. We need to immediately revert your changes and release an emergency patch. This is exactly the kind of issue that can destroy trust in open source projects.
I'm disappointed that this wasn't caught during code review, but ultimately the responsibility lies with the original implementation. Please review the attached security analysis and learn from this mistake. Kevin. Sadie read the email 3 times, each pass making the situation feel more catastrophic. The API she had been so proud of, the code that had made her feel like a real developer, contained a vulnerability so severe that it could compromise data for thousands of users. The attached security analysis was written in technical language that Sadie only partially understood, but the implications were clear. Her implementation had failed to properly sanitize database queries, allowing malicious users to inject SQL commands that could access or modify any data in the system. It was the kind of beginner mistake that every programming tutorial warned against, but somehow she had missed it entirely. Worse, the vulnerability had been discovered not through internal testing, but by an external security researcher who had responsibly disclosed it to the logistics flow team. That meant her flawed code had been publicly available for weeks, potentially exposing real businesses to data breaches. Within hours, the Logistics Flow GitHub repository was flooded with activity. Issues were filed, emergency patches were submitted, and discussions erupted about improving the project's security review process. Sadie watched helplessly as her contribution became the center of a crisis that threatened the entire project. A notification appeared showing that Kevin Wu had removed her from the contributors list and revoked her access to submit future changes. The message was brief. Given the severity of the security issue, we're implementing stricter contributor requirements. You're welcome to reapply once you've completed formal security training. The rejection felt like a slap across the face. In one morning, Sadie had gone from being a valued contributor to a security liability who couldn't be trusted with access to the codebase. But the professional humiliation was nothing compared to what happened next. That evening, as Sadie sat in her tiny apartment trying to process the day's events, her phone rang. Her father's name appeared on the screen. "Hey, Dad," she answered, grateful for what she hoped would be a normal conversation about family news or weekend plans. "Sadie, I just got off the phone with your Aunt Carol. She mentioned that her son James works in computer security now, and he heard about some kind of problem with a project you were involved in." Sadie's blood ran cold. James was her cousin, 3 years older, who had graduated from Carnegie Mellon with a computer science degree and now worked for a cybersecurity firm in Silicon Valley. She hadn't seen him in years, but apparently the tech world was smaller than she had realized. "It's not as big a deal as it probably sounds," she said, already knowing her father wouldn't let this slide. "James said you created some kind of security hole that could have exposed people's private information? Is that true?" "There was a vulnerability in some code I wrote, yes, but it was caught and fixed before anyone was actually harmed." "So you did create a security problem." Her father's voice carried the tone she remembered from childhood lectures about responsibility and consequences. "Sadie, this is exactly what I was worried about when you quit your stable job to chase after these big dreams." "I didn't quit my job, Dad. I went part-time to—" "You cut your income in half to play around with computer programming, and now you've created problems that could have gotten people in real trouble. Do you understand how serious this is?" The conversation spiraled from there. Robert Miller, drawing on secondhand information from Aunt Carol's interpretation of what James had told her, painted a picture of Sadie as reckless and unprofessional. Every point she tried to make in her defense was met with evidence of why her approach had been misguided from the beginning. "You've been living in a fantasy world, honey. Real programming, the kind that matters, requires years of proper education and training. You can't just learn this stuff from YouTube videos and expect to compete with people who went to MIT and Stanford. I've been working with developers from major companies. My code was accepted into a project used by real businesses. And now that same code has caused a security crisis. Doesn't that tell you something about whether you're actually ready for this kind of work?" The call ended with her father suggesting, again, that she consider returning to school for a more practical degree, perhaps in business administration or healthcare. "There's no shame in admitting you aimed too high, Sadie. The important thing is learning from your mistakes and making better choices going forward." After hanging up, Sadie sat in the dark for nearly an hour, replaying both the security crisis and her father's words. The rational part of her mind knew that making mistakes was part of learning, that even experienced developers occasionally introduce vulnerabilities, and that the logistics flow incident was a setback rather than a catastrophe.
But the emotional part of her mind was listening to a much darker narrative. Maybe her father was right. Maybe she had been fooling herself about her abilities.
Maybe the confidence she had built over the past few months was based on a foundation too weak to support real professional responsibility. The next morning brought another blow. Sadie checked her email to find a message from the recruiter at DataSync Solutions, the startup that had expressed interest in her work. "Hi, Sadie. I wanted to follow up on our previous conversation about the junior developer position. After further review and some additional reference checking, we've decided to move forward with other candidates. We appreciate your interest and wish you the best in your job search." The timing couldn't have been coincidental. DataSync was a small company in Portland's tight-knit tech community. Word of the logistics flow security issue had probably reached them within hours of the emergency patch being released. Sadie realized that her mistake hadn't just damaged one project. It had potentially damaged her reputation throughout Portland's tech scene. In a community where developers moved between companies and projects regularly, being known as the person who introduced a critical security vulnerability could follow her for years. Over the following days, Sadie found herself paralyzed by self-doubt. She opened her laptop several times, intending to work on new projects or apply for positions, but each attempt was derailed by questions about her competence. What if she made another serious mistake? What if she really wasn't cut out for professional development work? Her part-time schedule at Tech Support Plus, which had felt restrictive just weeks earlier, now seemed like a refuge. Helping customers with password resets and printer problems felt manageable in ways that building complex systems no longer did. Janet Rodriguez noticed the change immediately. "You've been different this week, Miller. Less focused, more, defeated. What's going on?" Sadie explained the logistics flow situation, the conversation with her father, and the rejection from DataSync Solutions. Janet listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding or making sympathetic sounds. "So let me get this straight," Janet said when Sadie finished. "You made a mistake that every developer makes at some point in their career. You learned from it, and now you're ready to give up on everything you've worked for over the past 4 months." It wasn't just any mistake. It was a security vulnerability that could have exposed sensitive data. And was any data actually exposed? No, but were any businesses actually harmed? Not that I know of, but the potential for mistakes exists in every line of code ever written. You know what separates good developers from bad ones? Good developers learn from their mistakes and become more careful. Bad developers either never make mistakes because they never try anything challenging, or they make the same mistakes over and over. Janet pulled up a chair and sat down facing Sadie directly. "I've been in this industry for 20 years. You know how many security vulnerabilities I've seen introduced by developers with computer science degrees from prestigious universities? Hundreds. You know how many of those developers went on to have successful careers despite their mistakes? Most of them. But my father thinks, your father fixes cars, not software. With all due respect to his mechanical expertise, his opinion about your programming career is worth exactly as much as your opinion about transmission repair." The comparison was blunt enough to make Sadie smile despite her mood. "The question isn't whether you made a mistake. The question is what you're going to do next. Are you going to let one setback convince you that you don't belong in this field? Or are you going to prove that you can learn, adapt, and become stronger?" That evening, Sadie opened her laptop and forced herself to do something she had been avoiding. She studied the security analysis of her flawed code in detail. She researched SQL injection attacks, read documentation about secure coding practices, and worked through tutorials on input validation and database security. It was painful to confront the magnitude of her mistake, but it was also educational. For the first time since receiving Kevin Wu's email, Sadie began to understand not just what she had done wrong, but why secure coding practices existed and how to implement them correctly. As she worked late into the night, surrounded by security documentation and code examples, Sadie realized something important. The developer who could understand and fix security vulnerabilities was more valuable than the developer who had never encountered them. Maybe her father was right. Maybe this setback wasn't evidence that she didn't belong in the tech world. Maybe it was proof that she did.
2 weeks after her security disaster, Sadie made a decision that would have seemed impossible during her darkest moments of self-doubt. She was going to build something that would prove, to herself and to everyone else, that she belonged in the world of professional software development. The idea came to her during a mundane Tuesday morning at Tech Support Plus, while helping a small business owner named Maria Santos troubleshoot connectivity issues with her restaurant's point-of-sale system. Maria's frustration was palpable as she described how the system failures were affecting her ability to process orders during lunch rush. "Every time it goes down, I lose customers," Maria explained. "But the company that sold us this system charges $300 just to send someone out for basic support. I can't afford that kind of money every time something stops working." As Sadie walked Maria through the troubleshooting steps, she began thinking about the gap between the sophisticated enterprise software solutions she had studied and the reality faced by small businesses like Maria's restaurant. Most small business owners couldn't afford the kind of robust, well-maintained systems that large corporations took for granted. What if there was a way to bring enterprise-level reliability and security to small business applications, but with the simplicity and affordability that companies like Maria's needed? That afternoon, Sadie began sketching out the architecture for something she called TechFlow, a platform that would help small businesses manage their operations with the same level of security and reliability that large companies enjoyed, but without the complexity or cost. The core concept was elegant, a modular system where small businesses could add features as they needed them: inventory management, customer relationships, financial tracking, employee scheduling, all built on a foundation of robust security practices that Sadie now understood better than she ever had before. But this time, she wasn't going to work in isolation. The logistics flow disaster had taught her that even the most carefully written code needed multiple sets of eyes to catch potential problems. She needed collaborators, mentors, and advisors who could help her avoid the mistakes that had derailed her previous project. Her first call was to Sarah, who listened intently as Sadie outlined her vision for TechFlow. "This sounds ambitious, like really ambitious. Are you sure you're ready to take on something this complex after what happened with Logistics Flow?" "I'm ready because of what happened with Logistics Flow. I understand security vulnerabilities now in ways I never did before. I know what questions to ask, what practices to follow, and most importantly, I know I need help." "What kind of help?" "I want to build this the right way, with proper code reviews, security audits, and mentorship from experienced developers. I'm not trying to prove I can do everything myself anymore. I'm trying to prove I can build something valuable with the right team and processes." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "You know what? That actually sounds like a much more mature approach than your previous projects. Count me in as an advisor at least. I can't commit to coding time, but I can review your architecture decisions and help you avoid common pitfalls." With Sarah's commitment secured, Sadie began reaching out to other developers she had connected with through online communities and forums. Her approach was refreshingly honest about her recent setback and her determination to learn from it. She wrote in her outreach messages, "I'm looking for experienced developers who would be willing to provide guidance and code reviews for a new project. I recently made some significant security mistakes that taught me the importance of collaborative development and proper review processes. I'm not looking for free labor. I'm looking for mentorship and the opportunity to contribute to something meaningful while learning from people who know more than I do." The response was surprisingly positive. 3 developers agreed to serve as informal advisors: Chen Wei, a senior engineer at Nike who specialized in e-commerce security; Marcus Rodriguez, a freelance developer who had built payment systems for small businesses; and Dr. Amanda Kim, a computer science professor at Portland State University who researched cybersecurity applications for small enterprises. Each advisor brought different expertise and perspectives. Chen Wei helped Sadie understand enterprise-level security practices and how to implement them efficiently. Marcus Rodriguez shared insights about the specific challenges faced by small businesses and the features they actually needed versus what developers thought they needed.
Dr. Kim provided academic rigor around cybersecurity research and best practices for testing and validation. The first month of SecureFlow development was unlike anything Sadie had experienced before. Every significant code change was reviewed by at least 2 advisors. Every architectural decision was discussed in weekly video calls where Sadie had to defend her choices and consider alternative approaches. The feedback was sometimes harsh, but it was also constructive in ways that the logistics flow reviews had never been. "Your authentication system is solid," Chenwei commented during a code review, "but your session management needs work. Here's why this approach won't scale, and here are 3 better alternatives to consider." Instead of feeling criticized, Sadie felt educated. Each review session taught her something new about professional software development practices. The breakthrough moment came during the 4th week of development, when Sadie was struggling with implementing real-time data synchronization between different modules of the SecureFlow platform. The technical challenge was complex enough that she had been spinning her wheels for days without making meaningful progress. During their weekly call, Dr. Kim suggested a completely different approach based on event-driven architecture patterns that Sadie had never encountered. Instead of trying to synchronize data between modules directly, what if each module publishes events when data changes, and other modules subscribe to the events they care about? Dr. Kim explained. "It's more complex to set up initially, but it's much more reliable and scalable." The suggestion sent Sadie down a research rabbit hole that lasted 3 days. She studied event-driven systems, message queues, and distributed architecture patterns. The learning curve was steep, but something about the elegance of the event-driven approach resonated with her understanding of how complex systems should work. When she finally implemented the new architecture, the results were dramatic. Not only did the synchronization problems disappear, but the entire system became more responsive and easier to extend with new features. "This is professional-level architecture," Marcus Rodriguez commented on her implementation. "You're not thinking like a junior developer anymore. You're thinking about how systems need to work in the real world." The compliment meant more to Sadie than any praise she had received during her entire journey. It wasn't just validation of her technical skills, it was recognition that she was developing the kind of systems thinking that separated good developers from great ones. Word about SecureFlow began spreading through Portland's small business community, largely through Maria Santos, who had become an enthusiastic early tester. Maria's restaurant was using a prototype version of the inventory management module, and she had been telling other business owners about the positive impact it was having on her operations. "Before SecureFlow, I was tracking inventory with spreadsheets and hoping for the best. Now I can see exactly what I need to order, when I need to order it, and how much it's going to cost. It's like having a business consultant built into my computer." More importantly, Maria had referred 3 other small business owners who were interested in testing different modules of the platform. Each new user provided valuable feedback that helped Sadie refine the system and add features that addressed real business needs. The project was gaining momentum in ways that felt both exciting and terrifying. Sadie was no longer just building a portfolio project to demonstrate her skills. She was creating something that real businesses were depending on for their daily operations. During a particularly productive evening in April, as Sadie was implementing a new financial reporting feature based on feedback from one of Maria's referrals, her phone buzzed with an unexpected notification. Someone had sent her a LinkedIn message. She opened the app expecting to see another recruiter inquiry or networking request, but the sender's name made her pause. David Chen, CTO, TechFlow Industries. The message was brief. "Hi, Sadie. I hope you're doing well. I've been hearing interesting things about a project called SecureFlow through Portland's Small Business Network. A client of ours mentioned they're using it and are impressed with the security and reliability. I'd love to learn more about what you've been working on. Would you be interested in having coffee to discuss your project and potential opportunities at TechFlow? Best regards, David Chen."
Sadie stared at the message for several minutes, reading it multiple times to make sure she wasn't imagining things. David Chen, the same David Chen who had rejected her application 6 months earlier, was reaching out to her. But this time, he wasn't offering her an interview for a junior position. He was asking to learn about her work. For the first time since her logistics flow setback, Sadie allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she was finally becoming the developer she had always wanted to be.
The coffee meeting with David Chan was scheduled for 10 a.m. on a Thursday at a trendy cafe in the Pearl District, just 2 blocks from TechFlow's headquarters. Sadie arrived 15 minutes early, ordering a simple black coffee and choosing a table near the window where she could watch for David's arrival. This time, everything felt different. 6 months earlier, she had approached TechFlow as a supplicant, hoping for validation. Now, she was meeting David as an entrepreneur who had built something that businesses actually used and valued. The shift in dynamic was subtle but profound. David arrived precisely on time, looking more casual than she remembered. Jeans, a button-down shirt, and an expression of genuine curiosity rather than the polite professionalism she recalled from their previous interactions. "Sadie, thank you for making time," he said, settling into the chair across from her. "I have to admit, when I heard about SecureFlow from one of our clients, I was surprised to learn you were behind it. The last time we spoke, you were working in tech support." "A lot has changed since then," Sadie replied. "That rejection, actually, turned out to be exactly what I needed to push myself in directions I wouldn't have explored otherwise." David smiled. "Tell me about SecureFlow. Our client, Portland Artisan Foods, mentioned they're using it for inventory management and that it's more reliable than systems costing 10 times as much." For the next 30 minutes, Sadie walked David through SecureFlow's architecture, the problem it solved for small businesses, and the growth it had experienced over the past few months. She explained the security-first approach she had developed after her logistics flow experience, the mentor network that had guided her development process, and the real-world impact the platform was having on businesses throughout Portland. "We have 43 active business users now," she explained, ranging from restaurants to retail shops to small manufacturing companies. "The platform processes about $2.3 million in transaction data monthly, and we've maintained 99.7% uptime over the past 3 months. David's eyebrows rose. "Those are impressive numbers for a platform built by a single developer. What's your team structure?" "It's still primarily me for development, with guidance from 4 advisors who provide code reviews and architectural oversight. I've also contracted with a part-time designer and a customer support specialist as the user base has grown." "And funding?" "Bootstrap so far. I'm charging users a monthly subscription fee that covers hosting costs and pays me enough to work on this full-time. The margins are thin, but the business is sustainable and growing." David leaned back in his chair, studying Sadie with an expression she couldn't quite read. "I'm going to be direct with you. When we rejected your application last year, it was because we needed someone who could contribute immediately to complex projects without extensive training. You were clearly intelligent and motivated, but you lacked the depth of experience we required." Sadie nodded, remembering the sting of that rejection. "The developer sitting across from me today is fundamentally different. You've built a platform that's solving real problems for real businesses. You've demonstrated the ability to learn from significant mistakes and implement enterprise-level security practices. Most importantly, you've shown that you can think like a business owner, not just a programmer." He paused, taking a sip at his coffee before continuing. "TechFlow is about to begin development on a new product line focused on small and medium business solutions. We've been looking for someone to lead that initiative, someone who understands both the technical requirements and the business realities of that market segment. Based on what I've seen with SecureFlow, I think you might be exactly what we're looking for." Sadie felt her heart rate accelerate. "What kind of role are you talking about?" "Senior product developer, with a path to engineering manager as the team grows. You'd be responsible for building a team, defining the technical architecture, and ensuring we create solutions that actually serve the SMB market rather than just scale-down enterprise products." The offer was beyond anything Sadie had imagined when she first applied to TechFlow. Senior product developer, engineering manager, leading a team? The salary would be $165,000 to start, with equity participation and budget authority for your team. We're also willing to acquire SecureFlow as part of the arrangement, which would give you additional equity and ensure your existing users transition seamlessly to our platform. Sadie stared at David, processing numbers that seemed surreal compared to her current financial situation. 6 months ago, she had been living paycheck to paycheck in a converted garage. Now someone was offering her a senior position at one of Portland's fastest-growing tech companies. "I have to ask," she said, "why this offer? Why now?" David smiled. "Because you've proven something that we can't teach, and most developers never learn. You understand that technology only matters if it solves real problems for real people. Most engineers I interview can talk about algorithms and frameworks all day, but they've never sat with a business owner who's losing money because their systems don't work." He gestured towards the window where they could see people walking to and from the office buildings that housed Portland's thriving tech scene. Everyone in those buildings can write code, but very few of them can build businesses. You've done both. Sadie spent the weekend considering David's offer, but she also did something that would have been unthinkable 6 months earlier. She asked for time to explore her options. On Monday, she reached out to Chen Wei, her mentor at Nike, to discuss the situation. "David's offer sounds incredible," Chen said during their phone call, "but I want you to consider another possibility. Have you thought about continuing to grow SecureFlow independently?" "I've thought about it, but TechFlow has resources I could never access as a solo developer. Funding, marketing reach, enterprise sales capabilities."
True, but you'd also be giving up control over the direction of the platform. At TechFlow, you'd be building what they want to build. With SecureFlow, you're building what you believe the market needs. The conversation with Chen made Sadie realize she needed to have an honest discussion with someone who knew her better than anyone, Sarah. That evening, she called her friend in Seattle. "This is a good problem to have," Sarah said, after hearing about both the TechFlow offer and Chen's suggestion to continue growing SecureFlow independently. 6 months ago, you didn't have any options. Now you're choosing between joining one of Portland's hottest startups in a senior role or continuing to build your own company. What would you do? I'd ask myself what I'm trying to prove, and to whom. The question stuck with Sadie for the rest of the week. Was she trying to prove to her father that she belonged in the tech world? Was she trying to prove to David Chen that he had made a mistake by rejecting her? Or was she trying to prove to herself that she could build something meaningful? On Friday evening, as she sat in her tiny apartment working on a new feature for SecureFlow, her phone rang. Her father's name appeared on the screen. "Hi, Dad." "Hey, honey. Your mother mentioned that you've been having some big career conversations lately. How are things going with your computer work?" Sadie paused, surprised by the genuine interest in his voice rather than the skepticism she had grown accustomed to. "Actually, really well. I've built a software platform that's being used by small businesses, and I've received a job offer from a major tech company." "That's wonderful, Sadie. I have to admit, when you started down this path, I wasn't sure it would work out. But your mother showed me an article about your software platform in the Portland Business Journal, and I'm proud of what you've accomplished." The conversation that followed was unlike any they had shared since Sadie began her transition into tech. Robert Miller asked thoughtful questions about her work, expressed genuine admiration for her perseverance through setbacks, and even shared that he had been telling his customers at the auto shop about his daughter who built computer systems for businesses. "I owe you an apology," he said near the end of their call. "I was so worried about you getting hurt by aiming too high that I forgot to trust in your ability to figure things out. You've always been smart and determined, and you've proven that those qualities matter more than the fancy degrees I thought you needed." After hanging up, Sadie realized that her father's approval, while meaningful, was no longer the validation she was seeking. She had found something more valuable: confidence in her own judgment and abilities. The next morning, she made her decision. She called David Chen and politely declined TechFlow's offer, explaining that she had decided to continue growing SecureFlow independently. David was disappointed, but not surprised. "I understand. Building your own company is the harder path, but potentially more rewarding. If you ever change your mind or if you need strategic partners as SecureFlow grows, don't hesitate to reach out." 2 years later, Sadie Miller stood in the boardroom of SecureFlow Technologies, preparing to address the board of directors and investor group. The converted garage apartment memory was a distant memory, replaced by a modern office space in southeast Portland that housed a team of 12 employees. SecureFlow now served over 800 small businesses across the Pacific Northwest, with expansion plans for California and Washington state in development. The company had raised $3.2 million in Series A funding and was projected to reach profitability by the end of the year. As Sadie looked around the conference table at the faces of investors, advisors, and team members who had joined her vision, she thought about the phone call she had received from her father that morning. "Congratulations on the promotion to CEO, honey," he had said, his voice filled with pride. "I know some people might wonder how someone your age gets to run a whole company, but I've seen how hard you've worked for this." She had smiled, remembering his very different reaction to her ambitions just a few years earlier. "Thanks, Dad. I've learned that when people underestimate you, it just gives you more room to surprise them." As the board meeting began and Sadie started presenting SecureFlow's strategic plan for the next 3 years, she realized that the journey from tech support operator to CEO hadn't been about proving anyone wrong. It had been about proving to herself that she was capable of building something meaningful. And she was just getting started.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.